The 1919 Longview Riot was one of many racially motivated violent outbreaks during the Red Summer of 1919, a period marked by a nationwide wave of white supremacist attacks on black communities following World War I. Here's the detailed history they probably never taught you in school. Context: post-WWI America and racial tension in 1919, the United States was reeling from the aftermath of World War I. African-American veterans returned home expecting greater rights and respect for their service. But instead, they faced the same discrimination and hostility, often intensified. This period also saw a rise in black economic empowerment and political activism, which was perceived as a threat by many white Americans. In Longview, Texas, a small East Texas town with a large black population, these national tensions played out locally. Key figures and tensions: Dr. Calvin P. Davis, a prominent black educator and agent of the Chicago Defender, a widely read black newspaper, was encouraging black residents to assert their rights and seek better economic opportunities. The Defender published an article about the lynching of a black man in Longview and accused local white residents of injustice. This inflamed white tempers. One of the flashpoints was the success of black farmers, particularly in cotton sales, which challenged the traditional white economic dominance. The riot, July 10-12, 1919, it began with a beating. A black man named Lemuel Walters was accused of making advances toward a white woman and was brutally beaten by a white mob. Later, Dr. Davis and a teacher named Samuel L. Jones were attacked in retaliation for the Defender article and for speaking out. Violence erupts. Black residents of Longview, aware of possible lynching attempts, organized to defend their community. On the night of July 10th, a white mob returned and shots were exchanged. The next night, the mob burned down several black homes and businesses, including Dr. Davis's house and a lodge used as a meeting hall. Black residents were forced to flee into the woods to escape. State response and martial law. The Texas National Guard was called in, and military rule was declared over Longview from July 12th to 18th. Over 100 people were arrested, but no white rioters were ever charged. Aftermath and legacy: the riot left much of Longview's black business district in ruins. Black leaders were essentially run out of town. It instilled fear, but also sparked more organized efforts for civil rights among African Americans. This event was part of a pattern. During the Red Summer, at least 25 major race riots broke out across the country, including in Chicago, Washington, D.C., and Elaine, Arkansas. Why it was forgotten: stories like Longview didn't fit the dominant narrative of post-war progress. Black resistance and self-defense were downplayed or omitted in history education. Like many Red Summer events, it was quietly buried in local histories and not widely taught. Aftermath: what happened to the community? After the violence ended, the damage was severe. Dozens of black homes and businesses were destroyed. Many black residents fled Longview permanently, fearing for their lives. Dr. Calvin P. Davis and others who had advocated for black empowerment were either forced to leave or were placed under intense scrutiny. The economic setback was massive. The destruction of black-owned property was a strategic attack. It wasn't just about intimidation, but about maintaining white control over labor, land, and local commerce. The law's silence. No justice served, despite the obvious destruction, and multiple eyewitness accounts. No white perpetrators were ever charged or held accountable. Instead, the local authorities arrested black men, over 100 of them. The state's solution was to temporarily suppress violence through military force, not address the root cause or seek justice. This pattern mirrored nearly all Red Summer incidents. Black communities punished, white mobs unscathed, psychological and social consequences. The psychological toll was deep and lasting. For black families, the riot was a traumatic betrayal by both their neighbors and the justice system. Many veterans who had returned expecting dignity found themselves back in a system of racial terror. Yet there was also a quiet shift. Many African Americans began to reject passivity. Self-defense, community solidarity, and a new resolve for civil rights began to emerge from the ashes. This riot was not the end, but rather a signal that a new era of organized resistance and activism was coming. The Red Summer and the pattern of violence. Longview was just one node in a much larger outbreak. Chicago, July 27th, August 3. 38 people killed, over 500 injured after a black teenager was stoned to death for swimming near a whites-only beach, Washington, D.C. July. Black veterans led organized defense against white mobs and police. Elaine, Arkansas, September 30th. The deadliest of all, over 200 black sharecroppers were slaughtered after they tried to form a union. These events weren't random. They reflected deep national anxieties. White fears of losing political and economic power aimed at returning black veterans who didn't know their place. The growth of black institutions, education, and media, especially newspapers like the Chicago Defender, which encouraged racial pride and solidarity. Why Longview? Still matters, the 1919 Longview Riot wasn't just a local flare-up. It was a microcosm of America's unresolved racial contradictions after WWY, the beginning of a more militant and organized black freedom struggle. The early seeds of the civil rights movement. Decades before the 1950s, and yet it remains largely absent from textbooks, like so many other chapters in the Red Summer, media coverage and misinformation. The mainstream white-owned press at the time often downplayed the scale of white violence, framed the riot as Negro trouble or a Negro uprising, blamed black residents for provoking the violence, especially because they armed themselves for self-defense. The Chicago Defender, however, a lifeline for black communities, painted a very different picture. It reported the beating of Lemuel Walters as unjust, and mob-led encouraged black resistance, and political organizing became a target of white ire, particularly because its circulation reached deep into the South and challenged local power structures. This difference in reporting created two parallel realities. One for white readers, one for black readers, survivor accounts, and the silence that followed. Survivor testimonies are hard to find, largely because many black residents fled and never publicly shared their experiences. Speaking out could still bring retaliation. Oral histories were passed down in private, often with a sense of pain, pride, and caution. One common thread among those who remained: a deep sense of betrayal by the justice system, and a feeling that their citizenship, despite military service or community contributions, meant nothing to the state when whiteness was threatened. Community reconstruction and resilience in the years following. Black families who stayed behind rebuilt homes and businesses from scratch. With limited aid, some survivors formed mutual aid networks and quietly supported black migrants heading north. The riot helped accelerate the Great Migration, where African Americans left the South in large numbers seeking safety and opportunity. In northern cities, it wasn't just economic, it was a refugee movement within the United States. Long-term implications. The riot's shadow, though rarely discussed. The Longview Riot had long echoes. It contributed to the increased presence of federal investigators in later racial conflicts. It planted early seeds for organizations like the NAACP to focus more on Southern racial violence. It helped spark a mindset that would shape black activism in the coming decades. Not just survival, but resistance. By the time the civil rights movement took root in the 1950s and 60s, Longview was part of a long line of painful lessons. Don't wait for justice. Demand it, build it, protect your own. The echoes today. Longview isn't just history, it's a mirror. The silencing of racial trauma, the criminalization of black self-defense, the power of narrative control. Who tells the story? Who gets blamed? Who is protected? These themes still resonate in everything from modern protests to debates over history, education, and police violence. What happened to Longview's memory? Despite its intensity and impact, the Longview Riot faded from public consciousness for decades. Why? 1. Deliberate silence. Both black and white communities had reasons not to revisit the events. For black residents, it was trauma and fear of retribution. For white leadership, it was about protecting reputations and local stability. No monuments, no markers. Unlike sites like Selma or Montgomery, Longview had no public memorial for the riot for nearly a century. That absence shapes public understanding. What isn't remembered publicly is often forgotten culturally. School curriculum skips it. Most Texas schools never taught the riot, not as a warning, not as a lesson. Local histories focused on World War I veterans, agriculture, and oil, but not racial violence, efforts to reclaim the story. In the 21st century, there's been a slow but growing push to acknowledge what happened. Local historians and black community leaders have worked to preserve the memory through oral histories and public talks. In 2019, on the 100th anniversary, Longview held a centennial remembrance, a pivotal step in public acknowledgement. Community leaders organized panel discussions, historic walking tours, and interfaith ceremonies. It was both a memorial and a truth-telling session. This event wasn't just symbolic. It was a public reckoning with denial. And it wasn't easy. Some locals pushed back, arguing that bringing it up would reopen wounds. But silence was the real wound, and remembering was part of the healing. Why Longview still matters now. The Longview Riot is a case study in American forgetting. A town erupts in white supremacist violence. The black community organizes for survival. Justice is denied. Memory is suppressed. Now, in an era where critical race theory is under attack, books are banned, and history is politicized, Longview's silence reminds us of a bigger truth. Who controls the past, controls the future. George Orwell B. reclaiming stories like Longview. We don't just honor the dead, we arm the living with truth.